meeting of the Eastham Affordable Housing Trust, Thursday, December 12th, 2024. It is a hybrid meeting, although most of the committee members are here in attendance. But we do have a guest on the line. The meeting is being recorded and will be available on the Eastham website at www.ma.gov. So I'll call the meeting to order. We do have a quorum. We have 3 out of 4 members here. So the first order of business would be to look at the minutes from the July 24th and September 12th meetings as distributed. And I'll give the committee members a minute to take a look at those. We can take a look. He's supposed to be.
I reviewed them earlier. I didn't see any change.
Okay, thank you.
Right.
Oh, I just slipped them out. Like O.100.
Yes.
Looks like he covered some good stuff. I wasn't at either one of these.
Right. Okay, I'll entertain a motion for approval of the minutes.
So moved.
Okay,
Second,
Jeff moves, any seconds, all in favor?
I
Okay, passed unanimous 3-0. Put those aside. Yes, we did cover some great things. Okay, to the agenda for this year, financials. Are those?
Yep, so that's in your packet.
Okay,
And so up at the top is the balance sheet as of 9/30/2024. The ending fund balance, total of everything, all income and minus expenses is down at the bottom at the ending fund balance, 1,924,254. And in the colored areas, it breaks down what is made up of that. So up at the top, you'll see in yellow, the fund balance total. That's what's reserved for the rental assistance program and the housing emergency loan program. And then below that in blue is the total amount of unreserved CPA and non-CPA monies. And below in the little box where the yellow kind of corresponds with the yellow up top, it breaks out the rental assistance program of what's still encumbered, which is 203,081. And again, just to remember, this is as of 9/30. And then the help program at 245,487 is still encumbered.
so no one took advantage of the loan program, but rental
There-
assistance, fair.
No, we actually have a few people.
Oh, you do?
With the loan program, yeah. I have that in my staff report. I believe there's been at least 2 projects already this year. And there is one in progress with another couple of applications pending.
Right,
What? So I should know this, Rachel. What's the best way for someone to get up to speed on what it offers and how to apply it? Like the link on the town site?
Yes, it is. Yeah, and they can call Hatch, or they can call me and I can talk them through
Okay.
the basics and direct them
So
to Hatch. That
HVAC, roof, stuff like that.
Yes, and then housing, homeless prevention council for the RAP program. And Harwood Ecumenical Council for housing for the health program.
Yeah.
But if it's just easier, just direct them to me.
Okay.
I can start the discussion.
Okay.
And then,
Rich.
so in blue in the box is the CPA unreserved funds. Of 1,130,415. And the non-CPA unreserved uncommitted of 345,271,36. So it gives you the breakdown as well.
the rental income for that time period, is that pretty typical of, since we've started doing the receipts?
The rental income isn't in the Affordable Housing Trust. If you remember, we started a separate fund for that.
Right, but this has a line item for, income of. Oh, no, I read that wrong, never mind.
The income that's coming in at this time, the only thing that's coming is the interest from the
Interest,
bank.
right, I
Yeah.
misread the statement.
That's okay.
Yeah.
And then the expenses from the RAP program and health program. We haven't had any expenses yet from the
Right.
health program. And then I think that's about it.
Any questions? We have a reasonably healthy fund balance, which is good. In addition to the air quote reserves for housing that are being held through CPC. Each year, what we've done the last couple of years, instead of transferring money to the trusts, CPC is maintaining those funds, but earmarked, if that's the right term. Rich can correct me if I'm not using the right language, but earmarked for housing. So that we're building that up, that's good.
That's great.
because when we start to do some big projects, we're gonna need some big monies, right? Any other questions about the financials? Rich, do you have anything else you wanted to say about them?
No, it's okay. It's more along that line.
Speaking to the next one, I think.
Okay.
I'm just gonna get someone to print out the regulations that we talked with the select board, because I didn't have time to get them. And I don't think you have them in front of you right now.
No.
Okay.
We don't. That'd be the lease to locals? Yeah, okay. We can skip that agenda item for a minute.
Yeah.
And go to the next vacant seat replacement. We have one person who has applied, whose name I forget, through the search committee. Doesn't seem to have any background in housing, but has an interesting background, fairly new to the Cape and wanting to get involved. I was traveling and then got sick and then traveled again. So I've had a chance to catch up with Jackie to sort of brainstorm with her if she has any other ideas of anyone else that she thinks. Thinking about the trust and someone coming on that would be helpful as we move forward in the next couple of years, thinking beyond right now, but the next couple of years and the big projects in the Northeast Tamworth that's going to be done. Something that could help us in a leadership capacity within the town for that. So I'll do that, but I'll set up an interview with perhaps Amy, you and I could meet with the person who's applied.
Yeah.
And talk with them. And hopefully by next meeting, have a recommendation. A follow-up item to that we started to talk about from carrying over from the prior meeting was continue to think about the land off Sandy Meadow, both the piece to the left, that's a little triangle piece of property, and the piece along Route 6 that's actually available also. In discussion with the Open Space Committee, when we had our joint meeting, we talked about
No,
both
when was
pieces.
6?
That property extends all the way to Route 6.
Oh, okay. I
And
thought it went
it's-
up right just behind the kitchen lady there. I didn't know it actually went around.
Yeah, it does, right? Matt?
There's a little panhandle that comes out onto Route 6.
Mhm. And so both potentially are in play for doing an infill project that would be small scale, but give us the
Is the
opportunity.
Route 6 piece big enough to do anything with in that regard, or?
Want another curb cut, do we?
No, it
Well,
would
that's the
be,
question,
it would
right?
be, that would just be the access into, it's basically just like a little
Right,
rectangular thing, and then it opens up into the rest of the property.
So you,
I
both of you have some
originally
comments
had
to
you
make.
converse with Beth, so.
Yeah, I spoke to her at a conference recently and she let me know that they are pretty backlogged. And that it's not something they could get to immediately. But I did follow up with her recently with an email. So it is on their radar, and, she did let Paul and I know that she is stepping down at the end of February.
Oh,
So there will be another, person to be determined,
okay,
that she'll introduce us to, when they know who that is.
Okay, because I just exchanged messages with you. so
Yeah.
I don't, you're further
Okay.
down the path with her.
Yeah.
And then, I have yet to sit down with Matt Cole, but it's gonna happen sooner than later.
Okay.
So I will get that. And just see what he would think would be a viable project for them
Mhm.
and whether we.
or a company like them.
Right, right, and that would be either to develop rentals or subsidize something to sell, is that right?
Right.
Okay.
There was an interesting discussion yesterday. I know, Rachel, you were on the phone about the ADUs. Paul, I don't know whether I don't think you were on the call. for-
No, I'm signed up for the same session on Monday.
Well, I didn't. know
No,
that
This
there
was
Yeah.
yesterday afternoon. This was yesterday
Yes,
after 4 o'clock.
Afternoon at 4 o'clock. And a couple of just interesting things that are more for zoning than they are for this. But one of the things that they talked about was doing ADUs as condoizing them so that it creates home ownership opportunities for particularly the ADU part, so that it's in an affordable price point. And I wasn't sure whether our zoning would allow that to happen at this point.
It currently doesn't because we prohibit the units from being sold separately,
Right.
but that was,
That was to try to keep out short-term rentals.
yeah,
Right.
so.
But that may be something that the zoning task force might want to look at. There were two things
Is
that
that
they
what you're
talked
talking
about.
about?
One was allowing the condoization, because that does create
That piece.
home ownership opportunity, okay? And the second thing that they talked about was in the new regulations that came out Friday, still don't allow a requirement for owner occupied. You know, we were trying to be sure that at least one of the units was full-time, not necessarily owner occupied, but lived in full-time. And so one of the things that some other non-Massachusetts communities has done well, let me back up. And the other part of it is to make the building of the ADU financially feasible for the property owner. Okay, I would just choose I have to think through what I'm saying. To make it financially feasible, the difference in income between short-term rental income and full-time income is pretty substantial. And so to incentivize people to build the ADUs, what some communities have done is to allow the owner to rent the ADU short-term, making more money for a period of time, 3 to 5 years. And then it has to convert to a full-time property. So they can make up in those 5 years the investment in the construction cost. Plus, it's a lot easier to get construction financing if they have that as their business model, that they're going to rent short-term for a period of time to recover those costs. So they're much more likely to get an approved loan through Cape Cod 5 and so forth. That's what the speaker was.
Really,
saying.
opposed to a year-round rental.
Yeah,
Wow.
he showed that I
It's
will
unfortunate.
get a copy, but the difference in income between short-term rental and long-term rental on an annual basis is fairly substantial according to what they were showing.
Who was making that argument, Carolyn?
This was a guy from a company called Backyard ADUs. And they're a developer, that's what they do, but they're also a policy advocate and they work with communities to try and develop ADU capabilities. They're based out of Portland, I think.
I do want to mention Talitha from CDP is on our Zoom. She runs the ADU program at Community Development Partnership. So Talitha, if you feel like you want to jump in, please feel free if you have anything to add. If not, that's okay.
Thank you, Rachel. Yeah, I was unable to attend yesterday's. I'm hoping it was recorded because I was on another call. So this is just interesting to hear, but I do have a good connection and talk regularly with Tim from Backyard. And I've been on a couple of their panels, so I know Backyard pretty well. And I know they've been talking about the condoizing and some other programs around, I think, employer sponsored housing is another. They're pretty creative. So I'm excited to kind of hear what they discussed yesterday, and I'm hoping it was recorded.
I hope so.
Yeah. So the reason I was bringing that up is one, just to be sure it gets on the zoning task force radar because we meet next week. But also thinking about this particular piece of property, if we can get some interest in it and we can do it so that there are primary houses and ADUs, that just adds to the value for the developer.
Yeah. Doesn't feel great that, it's a 4 or 5 year, sort of a deferment on getting a family in there as far as that goes. If that was the person developing it, we
Right.
would have to agree to.
Yeah, I'm not suggesting
subsidize.
that's.
Yeah, it's,
I was more thinking about the condoizing.
yeah, that's
and the ownership
interesting, yeah.
opportunities.
Well, the condo piece is kind of similar to what happened all along like Back Bay, Beacon Hill area, like
Mhm.
all those individual buildings are individual condos. So
Right.
One of my own firm, I had like 30 of them. They're what individual buildings that were condos and had 3 people or 4 people in them. And it was a mess most of the time. But
Yeah,
but
I mean,
that's what they basically was similar to that.
I
Oh,
just.
yeah, I hear you.
As you talk with Matt
Yeah,
and,
yeah.
and thinking through
Yeah.
options.
Yep, and then there's maybe a possibility, like, since we've sort of come to the conclusion that the numbers don't necessarily work on a buy down for a single family, maybe to avert having to allow 4 or 5 years of, short-term rentals, maybe we could think a little bit about
buy
incentivizing
down.
the construction of
Yeah.
of an ADU for
That's on
that
our list.
specific purpose.
Exactly.
I'm also, being in the business, I'm not 100% sure that it's that much of a gainer to do short-term on an accessory versus a year-round. That you'd be presupposing that you sell out every week in order to make it.
And
that
cleaning
much more.
fees alone. are
Yeah,
gonna
it's
push
it-
things.
it's in the season, yes, you make a year's worth of comparable revenue in June, July, August, and September, but I don't think you make twice as much as you would if you had a year-round person in there
Right.
at a stable rent number.
I think that might be community dependent.
Yeah.
Some communities, no doubt, you're gonna make a lot more for Eastham. I
Yeah.
think you're probably
Yeah.
right.
Yeah, no,
Right.
there's not a ton of weekend rentals in,
Like Provincetown is
December,
totally
January,
different
February,
animal.
March, right?
Right.
So, I don't know, it's just.
So there's no action about that other than, well, just the condoization, if that's something that the zoning committee should
Yes.
consider.
Yeah, so that session yesterday was different than so.
Right.
The state folks are gonna be having a session on Monday, and I think there's another one. So they've come
About the
out,
new regulations.
yeah, so they came out with regulations that
She has her hand up.
that coincide with the
Right.
new law, and hopefully clarity will be coming. We will need to make some adjustments, so we need to put the ADU bylaw on the town meeting warrant.
Right.
I know there's some just housekeeping things, just amending
Square
definition of
footage.
things, but
Square
in-
footage.
yeah, but the
changes.
substantive things would be changing the square footage, and then if we want to consider this conversation piece, because we prohibit that.
Right.
right now. And I think the other thing is to consider is the well, no, I guess the short term, so we can prohibit the law allows us to prohibit the ADUs from being short-term rentals, but we can't require that they be owner occupied.
Oh, we can still do the short,
Yeah, you can prohibit
okay.
short-term, but we can't. So our bylaw right now gives the option. But we basically say you either have to rent this as a long-term or live in it. And which I think is good. I mean, that gives flexibility, but the new state law does not allow it. So we may have to take out that language, which may not be. I thought that was going to be worse than it is, but I think it kind of
So you
resolves
mean for like
itself because-
part-time
Sorry.
residents or what owner occupied, what?
Well, there's kind of two things, and that's what I want to find out on when I have the discussion, because a lot of bylaws require, and our old version of this did require that somebody, the owner of the property has to live on the property somewhere. That was
Right,
like-
and we changed
yeah,
that so that
and we changed that.
part-timers could
So now-
do it.
Yeah,
Which
or
I thought
just,
was
you
a
don't
great
even have, you
idea.
you could live in Florida, you just have this
Yeah.
investment property,
Yeah.
you're renting both, we allow that as long
Right.
as one of the units is long.
Long-term, right?
Right.
So the new ADU bylaw doesn't, we can't require that anyone live on the premise, which is
Okay.
fine.
Yeah.
But our language just says you have to live in that unit or rent it. So ours is a little different, and I want to
see.
find out if that is actually, we can keep that or not. If we have to lose that language, it may not be fatal anyways, because it kind of resolves itself, because if we restrict it short term, then the only other option is, and we restrict the short term and require that it has to be long term. So the only, sorry, I can't talk. The only option left is you have to either rent it year round or live in it. So it kind of, that's why it's kind of silly, because it's just,
Yeah,
why can't we just have that language just to be clear about it in the bylaw? But
Yeah.
anyways, so those are the three items that we might have to make like changes to the substance of the bylaw.
Talitha, I know you had some comments or questions.
Yeah, so just to the condoization piece, like I know it's not in our legislation statewide at this point because it's our first pass at this. So when you look at the research for like California and other states in the West that have really been doing this for about a decade, the condoization has come in a little bit later on. It wasn't their first pass at that. So hopefully we'll learn from them and not have to take a decade to kind of get to where they are, which is pretty impressive. But I just wanted to throw that out there. I don't know zoning wise if that's something town by town can look into if it's not at the state level at this point, but California does allow for that. But it took a while for them to get there. And then with the proposal from Chris, one of the questions I was throwing out when I was meeting with town folks like Paul was, it was almost a reverse. Could you, instead of looking at what we primarily had was like deed restricted properties to be either year round or affordable that are like in perpetuity, could you look at incentivizing someone to build it where they would have, maybe it's 3 years of long-term upfront year round, and then they could then rotate and have 3 years short-term and then go back to could there be a cyclical, partly because we don't know what the housing market's going to do. There's a lot of unknowns coming up the pike. And so to kind of lock people in or to expect them to come in and only be able to do long-term seems really inflexible. But I forget who raised the point earlier. It's like, we don't want to wait 5 years to then get people in there year round. So could we flip it first, but allow them to know that there is this short-term rental cycle that they can cycle through to be able to recoup things for a period of time and then go back into being year-round landlords. I don't know. That's just one of the thoughts I had, to have a little bit more flexibility. So I just want to
Thank
throw that
you.
out there.
And do you have, back to the conversation for just 1 second, it sounds like
Yeah.
you've some information from out west where they've been doing this for a while. Do you have any research or information around that you could share with Paul?
Totally. Yeah, I can totally send that Paul's way. I have in my info session kind of all of their legislation from 2016 to current date. So you can kind of just track, and there's great reports that have been done that show the permits and the exponential rise based off of the lessening of, the lessening of the restrictive zoning. And so the biggest piece is getting it by right first across the state. That's huge that we got that. And then they just kind of chipped away at things, including owner occupancy, parking, how many on a lot, condoization. Those are the kind of things that they, and permit fees, things like that, that they were just making it easier, along with funding, which is what I've been advocating for as well. So it's a blueprint, right? And hopefully we don't have to take 10 years to learn that if there's a blueprint already with
Thank
data. I'll send that to Paul and Rachel.
Thank
Okay,
you.
that'd be very helpful. Rich?
It's usually my role of being the bearer of bad news, but maybe that's a little bit of practicality. I like the condoization idea, but some of the practical challenges I think we'll have here in probably most of our towns here on the Lower Cape, and at least the Outer Cape, is the wastewater issue.
Yes, exactly.
So we have to adopt land use regulations, which controls the amount of flow that we can offer to property owners, and which is limited by the amount that we can recharge. And recharge, which is how you dispose of or put treated effluent back into the groundwater, is extremely limited on the Outer Cape. So the DEP doesn't just let you build a plant and say, oh, now you can do whatever you want. No, you build a plant to certain specifications that they license and regulate.
Right.
And in what we're working on now, we have set aside future growth for the Northeast 10 districts, particularly Tea Time and Town Center Plaza development, and some allowances for future growth, but not for every individual parcel in the town of Eastham. Obviously it would be everyone, but
Right.
additional growth on individual parcels for additional units that are owned separately.
Would it be growth though, if you just stick to Title V and there's a septic system, handle so many bedrooms and that's that?
Well, that's what remains to be seen.
Yeah.
Is a different. If you're not on the sewer system, are you gonna be required to be on an IA system? And your IA systems have limitations as to, they're built to certain flows, right?
Right.
So. This is exactly the stuff I would deal with all my little mini condo clients, right? Is
Right.
because you have 3 people, 4 people with a building with, didn't have sewer systems in the city, but different connections that they gotta maintain, and how you're gonna split all that stuff between the 2 or 3 people.
Right.
Which is just that's not really our concern, but the land use regulations and the water flows, the wastewater flows is. We'd have to figure that out.
Exactly. And in the presentation yesterday, it was one of the things that they talked about, Chris from Backyard talked about, and how different towns have approached that issue with different levels of technical knowledge and expertise and sort of just because kind of attitudes. So trying to have a progressive approach that still balances the environmental challenges. He's just was saying, just do something that has a balance between those two that's appropriate. Some towns were requiring for a 1-bedroom ADU, a whole new septic system that, is $25,000, and you just can't afford to do that, as opposed to a tie-in to the existing system. So there's a lot to look at, I know.
To Rich's point, we may not be able to, there's some baseline things like I mentioned about we'll have to update, but we may not be able to figure out what we want to do like on the condo
Right.
for this year.
For this year, yeah.
Wastewater's, influx and all that. So we may have to do let's get the baseline so the basic compliance.
It's young,
Then,
wastewater
but
is
these
young.
condo things are optional pieces that we don't have to do. And I guess just to set the expectation, we'll have to talk about it with the task force, because we really don't have
A lot of
any
time.
time to
Right.
get into.
No way.
So.
And I imagine our community, you probably know better, Amy, but that would be a item people would want to talk about.
Oh, yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely.
I would expect that would be true.
So
But anyway,
I envision
interesting.
that being a 2-parter.
Okay. Good.
Although an upgrade to IA wouldn't necessarily be disqualifying, if you get a year-round legal unit out of it. I mean, it's expensive, but it may not be prohibitive in the context of that sort of creating that extra unit. A lot of people, if you told them you can buy a cottage for $25,000 on your property, they'd say, okay, I'll do that.
Okay, that was a discussion that was coming off of the Sandy Meadow property discussion, and there's follow-up to be done, so that's good. Next is the Lease to Locals program, and I think Rich, you're here to talk to us with.
Got the, so you have it in front of you. So these are the guidelines that were presented to the select board. And I guess kind of the key points here, I'm not gonna read through each individual line. But as we explained, this is really a unit creation program, not a subsidy program, right?
Right.
So we propose subsidies to the owners of the property so that they can make up that difference between perhaps short-term and long-term profits, rental profits, by doing a long-term rental. So this would be for new rental opportunities, targeting really folks that are currently renting short-term and converting them to a long-term rental program. So on one of the pages here, on the second page, you see some of the proposed subsidies based on unit size. So that kind of tells you the scope of the program. We wanted to make this widely available, since we're funding it from money that was provided by free cash, which is the leftover proceeds from tax levies in prior years. We can have it widely available, so a qualified individual has to be a resident of Eastham for at least a length of time in the prior 12 months. This is on page 3, on 4C, or employed in Eastham. And there is a income limit not to exceed 250% of the CPA area median income. So a pretty high income limit for the tenant, not the landlord, not the land. So
And
one of the things that's different than Provincetown's program is Provincetown allows the rental of specific rooms. So if you own a house and you say you've got a 3-bedroom house and you're an elderly person or a single person, or you don't need the 3, whatever you are, but you don't need the 3 rooms, you use one, you want to rent out a room, Provincetown allows for that. Our program doesn't. We want to create whole units. It's what we wanted to target. So that's the quick synopsis of it. It's pretty straightforward, we think. Now that we've got these regulations, these are going to go into an RFP, which is slowly being worked on. I'd hope by during the holiday season, we'll have that wrapped up and out. Just kind of got a little bogged down with some of the budget process stuff, but we anticipate having this ready for April 1 or so. Which, I think is a good timeline because that covers the summer where a lot of people are losing their winter rental coming into the summer.
right,
And then we'll get them through one full cycle, one full season, the rental. And the idea is hopefully the person, the landlord and tenant have a good experience, and then that long-term rental retains in subsequent years. And based on what we understand, statistics on that, it was about 80% retention.
Close to that, yeah.
Yeah.
It's pretty amazing. It's only one time
it's a one-time payment.
payment, but
And we talked about at the October 7th meeting that this is a subsidy to the owner, landlord. If in conjunction with doing this, it surfaces that the tenant is struggling to pay the rent and the income qualify for our RAP program, the tenant can also apply and receive the subsidy that we have available to make rent affordable. So it can help both ways. There's nothing that says that both programs can't be in effect at the same time.
And to your point, I should have mentioned this. one of the things that's not in here, which is different than some other communities that have done this. And in my opinion, not that I have any experience running these programs, but just, I try to be very systematic and logical about some of these things. One of the things that other communities have in here is rent caps. When we discussed it, we felt like, well, let the market determine that. If
Right.
the owner is offering a property and he or she's offering it at too high a rent, then they're not gonna rent the unit.
Right.
And if someone can afford the unit, then they will go into it. I didn't want to be overly prescriptive and making a lot of unnecessary bureaucratic work. There's something that really isn't a problem. I think in my mind, that rental cap thing is a thing that exists in regulatory affordable housing monitoring, not in a program like this. And, in my mind is we reserve the right to change our rules here. And if we need to, then we would. And I think what we found in talking to some other people that run this program is if you have a rental cap, then guess what? Automatically, all the landlords are charging that amount.
Just go up to the max.
How will we market or publicize the program?
So the
If it's
RFP
approved.
we're issuing would be for a company to come and administer the program.
Mhm.
And there's, one that works locally and they handle all the marketing. So our RFP is gonna ask for a monthly administrative fee to do this work and ask them to provide us with a marketing budget. And so, this will be outsourced to hopefully an experienced program administrator in this type of work. And, Paul and Rachel and others hopefully take advantage of that year of a pilot program to learn the ins and outs of this. And if we need to do it or would like to do it going forward, maybe we have the experience and the capacity then to do it ourselves, perhaps, because I have a sense that it's probably going to be expensive in the sense of the percentage of administrative costs versus the programmatic costs, which, bothers me a little bit, but, sometimes it just is what it is to get something going, right?
And that it does hinge on town meeting approval of money to seed the,
But we have the money.
We have money in.
well, how much though? Wait,
We have the money. We had from the article from,
Article 4.
oh, the
Couple years back.
community,
Yeah.
The
okay.
community housing.
all right.
And because we're not, this is completely exclusive of any state funding, so we can target it towards local people. Is that right?
well, that's one of the regulations. You have to have been a resident for any length of time in the past 12
Right,
months.
Or
and that's why
or
we
work
can do
in
it,
the
because it's
town, yeah.
exclusively with our own funds.
Well, and there's an interesting, so we're also working with Orleans to see if we can do a joint RFP, which will lower our administrative costs. So we gotta work through a couple things on that. That's been one of the things that's held us up a little bit. But one of the questions, again, it's fine, it's due diligence, but in my mind, these weren't problems. But there's what's called the anti-aid amendment, which means that you can't just give people money, right? Like we can't give a nonprofit money because we want to give them a contribution. Yet we give lots of nonprofits money in our town, but it's not because it's a contribution, it's because they're providing a service to us and they document that they're providing services to our community. So basically it's a purchase of service.
Yeah.
So this is kind of the same thing, and it's not going to tenants. It's incentivizing landlords and owners to give us something of
Oh,
value.
I see.
So we've got,
Okay.
so we get through that, right? And then the other issue is, what's the other issue?
You did talk to legal
Oh,
counsel.
ADA issues. Not ADA,
No. Fair housing.
fair housing.
For housing issues.
Can you be selective? And the answer is yeah, because fair housing has specific things that you can't violate, and we're not violating any of them. And we're not giving it to the tenant. It's, again, the creation of a unit to an owner.
It's
So-
those other programs that maybe the renter gets.
So the landlord, the
Yeah.
property owner
Yeah,
slash
they're-
landlord can't violate fair housing standards, but nothing says we can't incentivize landlords.
Okay.
So those are the two legality type questions. And then finally bring it home to the housing trust, where I don't think we're necessarily relying on it. But I want to kind of maybe put you on notice. We don't know how successful this might be. We're hoping it's successful. Our criteria allow up to 250% of AMI. If we got people that were at 100% or less, we might ask you
Mhm.
to help.
Fund that.
Fund a little bit extra so that what we do have that's on the 100 to 250 goes a little bit further, right? So,
I'm,
Yeah, the 250, that's a big number.
yeah, well, on the back page, you can see
Yeah, yeah, that's,
what that's like.
that person should be buying if they've got.
well, so they theory, but that's a great question.
They can find it.
And we
Right.
logic through a lot of this and. First of all, there's some market conditions and what we're really looking for is that unit creation.
Mhm.
So the fact that you make a lot of money doesn't mean that you can find a place to live because there's aren't places
No,
to
no,
live.
in fact, ask any doctor's office, they can't get docs to come down here.
Right.
Because they can't swing it.
So,
Yeah.
Maybe you're making a good amount of money and maybe you're a couple and you both have good jobs, you make a good amount of money up to 250. But you're sitting in a unit that could otherwise be affordable, or at least somebody that's not as making as much money.
Yeah.
So that creation of a unit at the higher end, even if it's a higher end unit, opens up hopefully a slot that somebody else can move into.
Right.
So,
Exactly.
Yeah, the
Again.
more the better across the board.
Exactly.
I agree with that.
so we didn't want to, so some people get bogged down on the affordable housing piece of this program and it just becomes too prescriptive and sometimes we just gotta let things go and that's
Yeah.
kind of our perspective.
You gotta let the market work,
Right.
but what you said is exactly right, is that higher income people are using lower cost housing because that's all they can find and displacing people who could afford the lower cost housing. So that's it.
And that's
Really
why,
important
yeah,
point.
and that's why I don't think deed restricted ADUs are a great idea because,
Right.
you just adding
units.
capacity is adding capacity,
Right.
and that's good.
Little A.
Yeah, exactly. A quick question, the CPA affordable housing limit, the chart, it says the CPA chart, I'm used to seeing
The
the
HUD.
HUD chart, why pick the CPA chart?
It's easier. And HUD never tells you 100%, and it might tell you 80%, and you say, "Well, I got 80%, I could calculate 100%," but no,
No, you
it
can't.
doesn't work out that way. That comes out every year. It's what our CPC committee uses. It gives you the perfect 100% number. So if you want to get to 250%, that's easy math to get to 200 or 250%. It's just cleaner.
You can do that extrapolation, unlike with the HUD chart,
Yes.
why is that?
HUD doesn't give you 100%, they go
Right.
up to 80.
But even the extrapolation to get to 100 doesn't quite work out.
Okay.
It's like not like the arithmetic, they have,
It's not
there's
linear.
like some other factor.
It's like I knew how to do math 30 years ago, but I can't do my kids' math now. It's just different.
Yeah.
No, can't tell you what.
Amen,
Yeah,
yes,
HUD has a very complicated
right,
methodology
Okay.
as to how they
It does.
determine.
Make you feel foolish sometimes, because
Yeah,
you're like, this
you
should.
can't.
But again, we get to
basically
pick.
math.
These are,
Yeah.
It's-
oh no, I'm just.
this is our program, our rules. So I
Yeah.
picked the what's gonna be easiest for us.
Yeah, great,
And if somebody wants a question of this, then we'll just, we'll make up our own numbers. We can say,
Yeah, and a lot
as
of our money,
determined by the, Rich BM and East Ham is our income.
right.
Whatever he says.
well, the fact
So-
that a lot of our money is CPA money that we dole out for things, it's great to use the same.
Right.
Numbers, I think.
Yeah, no, I just was curious if the difference, okay,
And then if we get into using the trust money, which is the
Right.
CPA money.
right. It
that's-
keeps it all selected, okay. Is there anything you need for the trust to do at the moment?
No,
At least be
I
aware.
think you might, in the future, we'll update you as to let you know that this is coming on. You may, depending on the interest we get, ask you for maybe a little bit of support on the administrative side of the cost of the program. And then definitely if we have candidates that might qualify programmatically, ask you for some of that. Again, all in the interest of preserving what we got. So we can, either do more in this first year or use that money to help extend it into a second year.
Rachel, you did research on this and Provincetown was what you looked at, or,
Yeah,
and they had a bit of buy-in, right?
they had a lot of buy-in. They're doing very well with their program. Last I knew, they were, and it was a couple of months ago. they were at 22 units. So,
And you're not to get off track, but when you talk about the ADU rental, short-term versus long-term, I agree, I don't think there's a huge difference in East Ham in most circumstances, but to the extent that it does exist, we could have this type of program to make that up. Get you to rent, hey, you're building this ADU, get it at a long-term lease and here's some extra money. So they got a guaranteed
Yeah.
thing versus a maybe thing with the short term. Right. It goes a lot further with the bank than. I don't know that bank's loan on the promise of short term.
No, they don't. They will loan often 75% of qualifying on a year round,
Exactly.
especially if it's leased. I mean, so.
Right.
Yep,
and I just want to note too, the Provincetown program only started in April
that's awesome.
of
Yeah.
2024, so they've done really well.
I mean, there's a certain amount of. I think people have to be somewhat disposed towards helping out to do this, because the math may or may not work, but it's nice to know that there's that many people in 1 year that were willing to take a shot at it. And that's
6 months.
seems like a lot.
Hopefully we'll find out a lot
Yeah.
in 1 year.
Well, does Nantucket do it or?
Nantucket does it as well.
And they've
Oh,
done it
they
for
were-
longer.
Yeah, they were on hold for a little bit. Nantucket, the town of Nantucket didn't do it. It was a nonprofit.
Oh.
And I think that has switched over to the town. But the nonprofit had run out of money to do it. Whatever they had set aside,
So
they
it was-
passed out.
Yeah,
It was very successful.
so it was very
over there.
successful. And that's where I think we got that 75 or 80% number that, right,
Mhm.
that people stick with it,
The retention.
the retention.
Yeah,
Well, that was
from,
a book of business that a vendor has in locally, so Nantucket and P-Town
Yep.
and Tahoe area.
Okay.
they have this program in other parts of
Yeah.
the country as well.
Great, thank you for developing it, and I know the select board, I think several of you, when you were there at the meeting in October, was very supportive of the program, so that's good. Glad to check that off our list of things we wanted to have done, thank you very much. Let's see, other business items, Rachel, if we looked at your report, is there something else that?
No, I just
wanna
want to
bring to our
jump back to
attention?
programs for a quick minute,
Okay.
because the ADU program is on there as well.
Yes,
So we do have a consultant working on that
Good.
program. It did take a back seat because we were working on the lease to locals. But we're hoping to see that up and running, early 2025 as well. That will, at this point, we believe it'll incentivize soft costs up to $10,000 and $20,000 in post-construction. We have $100,000 for that program through the free cash community housing.
Okay.
Article 4 money.
so someone considering doing an ADU would, once that program's in place, conceivably get 10,000 in soft cost upfront
Yep.
development and then 20,000 in construction.
Right. Yeah, and I've had a couple inquiries, so keep the list and
Right.
we'll be ready to follow up with them when it's in place.
And just something that coincides with that is, I think you were at the commission, UCOT commission session about the pre-approved housing plan.
Yeah.
So that we're commission's developing this program that basically would be full building plans, specs for different size housing units that would be pre-approved and that they already meet building code requirements and energy code and all that good stuff, but if the town wanted to adopt them, it's basically, here's a pattern book of plans that we know already. It would ease the regulatory, so you may not have to go through full site plan review or any review, because you're, and then you're not spending money on architects, so
Which
that's
is-
this, so.
Easily runs 5 figures.
Yeah, so that might stretch the money for this program where we may not, those folks that would want it for architectural plans.
That's a great idea to have,
Mhm.
7 or 8
Yeah.
plans on that, this is what an apartment above a 2-car garage looks like, and this is what a 600 square foot. That's great.
And that's part of what we're just trying to still work out with the parameters of this program is, because we want to make sure that we're guiding folks through like what do you actually need, because if you're applying, say, well, I need pre-development for architectural plans. Well, okay, you may not need that, but also, do you have a septic? Do you know what your septic
Yeah.
capacity is? Do you need a septic plan or something, a site plan? Like, we want to make sure you're getting the right, because there's no point paying an architect to design a 2-bedroom ADU if you don't have the septic capacity. So really, you really need is maybe a septic plan first. So
Right.
all of these,
Right.
that's what we're trying to like lock in these pieces so that we're guiding people, and we want to make sure the deliverable is also like, the town is gonna own the deliverable of the pre-development. So if it's a plan or something, the benefit to us is to get that plan into the town archives. It's gonna use, so we know what the we paid somebody for a septic plan. Well, now we know the septic capacity for that area that goes into our wastewater planning, so forth. So but we want to make sure we're.
Boy, what a 180 from 10 years ago, huh?
Right,
When nobody was doing them because it was a pain in the neck.
right. And an interesting concept, not to promote it at all, but just a concept was that the session we were in yesterday, that organization, that also not only do they policy stuff, but they do development and they do modular construction. So they have these kind of pre-approved plans, not only to the plan stage, but literally you
They're
can.
built, you just plug
They're
them in.
built, you
Yeah.
just, they
Right.
just deliver it on site.
Yep.
Wow.
So, that's kind of an interesting concept as
Yeah.
well.
This brings us back to the trust and, to extent, we might have to think about how we can utilize trust funds
Mhm.
for this program too, just like
Yes.
Lease to Local. So,
Right.
at what do they, so if they commit to or have a long-term lease for someone that qualifies some of the income guidelines,
Mhm.
to what, how long does that need to be in place for them to get some of this money from the trust as opposed to the limited 100,000 that we
Right.
got, right?
Right.
Right. And in which, when you think about the ADU, there are two pieces of property. And which piece of property has to be income qualified in order to qualify?
Well,
Right.
whereas they're renting it too.
Well,
Well,
if you would, so there might be a subset of people going to the program that are willing to
deed
restrict deed
for
restrict.
a period of time.
Right.
Right,
So that's the part we gotta figure out, like how to work that in the program, because I
Right.
can tap in the trust money to stretch the other.
but I guess what I was thinking was if the property owner who has the original meets the income guidelines themselves, then would that qualify and so that the ADU, it becomes complicated as to which one and which one gets rented and.
I just, I hear what you're saying, but practically speaking, I doubt someone that's 100% AMI. ADUs, you'd like to think they're affordable, but they're not.
They're not, yeah, okay, anyway, food for thought.
Does anyone know anything about Wellfleet? I know they had talked about ADUs within the park and they were just gonna move forward and do it. Anybody know if they've actually done that?
Or what?
And then what?
Like ADUs within the seashore?
Oh, sorry, that's another piece we have to clean up probably for this
Right.
year is because we currently. The big piece of the ADU is that towns cannot require any discretionary permit, so we can't require a special permit, which we don't. Except in the seashore because of,
Right,
the unique issue going on there, so we have to figure out whether. We can even do that, and which I don't think we can, but then,
I heard rumblings that Wellfleet was just gonna allow them anyway and see what happens.
Yeah.
but I
so.
think it's a little, I mean, for them to condemn a property, Jackie has said they don't have the money. The park to absorb these properties that they then. Revoke the certificate,
right,
There's a.
so are they going to?
Yeah.
Do anything about it, but what if they do get a hold of money, then what happens,
Well,
So-
you know, it's in one way, it's always at the owner, anything with the seashore, the property owner, it's always at their own risk because the zoning and planning board grants approvals that are perfectly fine under our local zoning bylaw.
Right.
And the seashore doesn't always agree with that, but
Right.
we always, I mean, that's just
Yeah.
a risk you take. Some people want to put that extra.
Yeah.
And I also think if you look at the zoning bylaw, the language, it is essentially, it's a seashore district, but it is essentially a residential district, which the state has said you cannot, in residential
Right.
districts, you can't require a special permit. But also, there's language in there about their preferred, the allowed uses, talk about, accessory, common, residential uses and common accessory uses, so.
Yeah.
You know, the town council is looking at this and Wellfleet also. So
Yeah.
we'll have some guidance. But
Okay.
that's one of those things we have to resolve for
Gotcha.
this year at least.
Rachel, anything else in?
I just want to add a couple of quick, 580 Massasoit. We're working with the architect to get, cost estimates so we can, submit a full application to the CPA, for this funding round and, hopefully if they approve, we can go to town meeting, in May. At which time we'll do, renovations to the historic part of the building as well as the two housing units.
I think that's nice to
Yeah,
just go in once.
yeah, we
Sure, thanks.
pivoted from two separate phases,
Yeah.
realizing, you know, when we all met that it's such a small
The
site.
disruption.
Yeah, the disrupt, exactly, so, going for it all at once, and then, you know, if we get approval, we'll have to work on an RFP. And, you know, move the thrift shop at that point. During construction, so.
I think it's something worth note now, as we all talk to folks, so I'm not sure. I don't know what the reaction from the CPA committee is gonna be, if they'll support it or not, but, because it's a lot of money, but when you break down the numbers, there's 2 units. The numbers break down to basically, it's what the cost of a per unit on any of these housing, any scale. It's basically breaking down, so we're in the right ballpark, but it's also a 2-part project. It's a historic renovation and housing. And a housing project. And then I kind of look at it like it's actually 3 units.
Right.
The thrift shop is, you know, there's that component, but when you break down the numbers across it, you really look at it like 3 units because all the HVAC, the fire suppression, the structural stuff is benefiting
Tied.
the COA, thrift store, the whole building, so all the tenants. And so this is something I'm going to point out to the CPA when we make the presentation, but.
I think the CPA struggles with things, and the CPC struggles with things like that, right? It's a little off. So I guess, and not to speak for the select board, you can do that, but
Please.
I think we feel like, hey, we own this building, let's make it what it needs to be,
Right.
not,
Just sit
excuse
there.
my language, half-ass it, you know?
Yeah, and the
So,
highest,
you know, we
yeah,
could use your support and, you know,
yeah,
asking people that this is
we
the
don't-
right thing to
yeah,
do.
yeah, and we can't not do anything, so you might as
Right.
well make the highest and best use of it, use all 3 pieces and do it at once, and that's the best deal we're gonna get for ourselves.
And we're obligated to certain things like ADA compliance,
Right,
because
right.
now it is a town building and. You know, whether, in my opinion, whether it's the town owned or not, there's a thrift shop. Whoever's controlling it. Anyone should be able to get in there and.
Right.
So
Right.
there's certain things that do add to the cost, but they're required, and like Rich said, we gotta do it right, we have to.
Yeah, you see too many examples of towns buying things and then they become dilapidated.
Right.
Because you didn't do what you needed to do, so that's such an iconic spot
Yeah.
down.
Yeah, it's a lot of money, but it's in line.
What is this article that you're proposing for the renovation of the units?
Do you know how much the total?
It's gonna be 70, 780,
Is that a
700,000.
final?
Well, that's the placeholder, so what we wanna do
About
is,
700,000
yeah,
for 3 units.
so. We're working on the specs, so we want, and it's supposed to go out to bid. So we're hoping that the time will work out, so end of February, March. Which is getting to the end of the CPA evaluation cycle, but we'd rather come back in and say, here's the actual number and everything, you know, it's less speculative, which is something that CPA is concerned with, you know, and that's part of their due diligence, but. Usually we're always coming in with like, we think it's gonna be, it's like,
Right.
we thought the calendar might line up, where we can actually come in and say, here's. But
Cause it's
otherwise.
major,
we've got a
it's not
placeholder.
just putting in a kitchen or
Right.
you were saying they have to add dormers and
Yes.
Right.
things like that. So that's, that's why it's
Yeah.
a lot more money.
Okay. But for,
But again, some of the stuff is wrapped into the whole building.
The three,
It's,
right.
Mhm.
we have to do it because we're doing the third unit on the floor, so that's gonna trigger some of these things, but it's gonna serve the whole building, so the HVAC and the fire suppression and things.
And
You have
as
to look
we're,
at it holistically as,
and as we're doing the renovations and the exterior renovations, it's the historic piece to the whole building where it's, for example, the windows. You know, they're not all historic right now, so we're going to be
Huh?
replacing those to make them what they should be.
it's a good joint project.
Yeah.
It really is. I was speaking of CPC, I know Elaine had mentioned that she had. Excuse me. A CPC related question. Was she able to hook up with you or answer her
I
question?
haven't spoken to her.
Okay, so hopefully that get resolved.
yeah,
Yeah.
she didn't speak to me yet,
Okay.
I'm not sure what it was.
I didn't. And she may have otherwise resolved it anyway, so, okay. Rachel, anything else that we
That's
need to do? Okay. Any other business?
Just a passing thought, actually, I was looking at the hot sheet this morning, and I don't know where we are with the acquisition and disposition piece of things, but. There was something that came on this morning on Southeast Ham Street, that is a home with a detached two-car garage with an apartment above it. That came on for $5.99, which was kind of intriguing to me, and I know it needs work, but if we're sort of using our 500 a unit, ballpark figure, and depending on what everyone was thinking. You know, if you could acquire it for 600 and put 400 into it and come away with a single family and a legal 1-bedroom apartment. It's might be at least worthy of taking a peek at.
Well, that was something that we just shared a few rounds of emails about. I was gonna bring up next on the agenda is. We need to develop some kind of, because we get these one-off things all the time.
Right.
And probably now it seems like once a month, somebody calls us.
Or or a homeowner calls.
Or a
right,
homeowner
right.
calls, and so. I think we need to develop a set of criteria. But more than just that. We need to programmatically figure out. What's the best way to handle those kinds of situations? Is it that we buy it, renovate it, and then rent it, or sell it, either one, so flip it basically, and then resell it. Is that we buy it and rent it, because we need both of those opportunities. Or is it that we increase our rehab program? So somebody could buy it knowing that they could qualify for a larger rehab amount. Again, with the deed restriction going to one or part, depending. So there's a lot of moving parts to that. That seems like maybe the next, since we've got lease to locals taken care of, or the ADU stuff is well on the way, maybe that's the next thing we need to look at is programmatically figuring out what we want to have happen, what's for the good and benefit of the community, and what would be the best way to try and figure out how to
Does
do
the
that.
town, I'm like, I don't know, but do we want to portfolio more stuff, or do we want to incentivize people to do it and maybe get a local person to buy it and make sure that they live there and somebody lives in the other, I don't know.
And that seems like maybe our next sort of big agenda item is how to
So we have,
deal with that.
yeah, Paul and I did have a discussion with the shared regional housing services.
Yes.
And we were thinking that that might be, and they had some thoughts on that, so we
Okay,
were thinking that might be a good project for them to work on. Right now it's through the county and through June, we have, oh, I don't know where our hours are at, but the town of Eastham had 30 hours.
of professional
allotted.
technical support
Yeah.
available to us.
So, and we are using them a little bit, but we thought that this would also be a good use of time
Okay.
as well.
That's very
Yeah.
good.
I think it would be a good agenda item, and I'm inclined to think, I think probably you are too, about almost like a public-private partnership. You don't want to be bringing this stuff on, owning the risk and liability and having to redevelop it and redeploy it. But if we had a program, similar at least to locals, but
Right.
for rehab or ownership,
Right.
that we're incentivizing a vendor that we go out to bid for to have to develop these things for us.
Mhm.
That might be
It-
something.
Right. So I think it's good that you're paying attention to that and seeing that there are those opportunities and plus the phone calls that we get.
It's good
And
to have a realtor on.
Well, it
Yes.
is, but it would also be good if we, yeah, and if I, you know. If we had if we had ideas or if someone in the community comes to you and says, I'd like to sell my house to the town at a discount. If we had a mechanism for, evaluating them and not letting them slide by necessarily.
Yeah.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
And so part of hopefully the technical support that we can give through this program will help us maybe look at that criteria and
That's exactly what. we're
formulate a
going
whole
Yeah.
program and vision of what the program is supposed to accomplish. I think that's awesome. Good. Any other business before the group? No, hearing none. Motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.